Okay, we are really moving along here and having a lot of fun. Putting aside other things because this is more fun. To work on the boat is more fun. Going great. You may have noticed that we're doing things just slightly differently from the first video. Everything in the first video can apply perfectly to this build, but this time, rather than just doing half the planking and doing epoxy on half the planking and then completing the planking, this time we did all the planking at once and did epoxy on all the planking. Which is easier, which is faster? This may be a little bit faster. I don't think there's much difference though. If you're a slightly more experienced builder, go for it, do all the planking at once. The only difference is when you have this much planking in place and it's not secured yet, you know, not epoxied in together, you have to check it a lot more carefully because you're checking twice as much planking to make sure it's all fair and that no planks are sticking out more than other planks or pushed in too far. And certainly no planks overlapping each other. That would be the worst. So more planking to check, but if you check it carefully, that's fine. And perhaps the epoxy goes on a little bit faster doing the larger surface areas, but there's not really much difference. So your choice, whichever way you want to do it, whether you want to just do half the planking and then get the epoxy on that. In some ways, if you're a new builder, that might be a little easier. You don't have quite as many planks that are somewhat, you know, loose, and you have to make sure your pins are holding and make sure the tape's on tight. And but doing the whole planking at once is kind of fun, and that worked fine as well. Now, at this point, don't take out your pins. Don't take off any tape, especially not the bow tape. The bow tape stays on until we've flipped the boat and done a fillet on the bow inside. And don't take off any of your other tapes until we have the bottom sections in place and epoxied firmly in place. The whole shape is still not totally defined, and so it's nice to have everything still pinned and held in place and stable. In fact, there's no reason none of the blue tape will come off until we flip the boat and epoxy the inside, and then we'll return and put the carbon fiber ribbons on the inside. Then we'll return to the outside, take off the outside tape, and cover over those areas with epoxy. Okay, now you may have noticed another variation here. On the first video, we did, when we were doing the bottom plywood, we did half one side of the boat and drew our pencil line to mark where that plywood, the perfect line where that top plank intersected the plywood. And that way we reached inside from the open side and marked it. This time we're going to work by reaching up underneath and marking it, and I think that'll work fine. To get the two pieces of plywood on at the same time and centered, though, is important. And what we're doing this time to make sure they stay centered, in hull section number 3, right on the center line, straight from above, we've stuck one of our standard pins right into the center line of hull section number 3, and then farther back in hull section 4, 5, 6, 7, we've stuck another pin centering that plywood. And let's take a closer look at those so you can see. It's a little hard to see pins from this distance, isn't it? Well, maybe we can zoom in even and see the pins. Let's try that before moving the camera. We'll just go in closer and closer here. There. Now you can start to see that pin right on the center line. Well, I'm not on the center line, but if I move to the center line, you'll see how that's exactly on the center line. And then the two pieces of plywood can butt right up against that pin. Now we're losing the focus on the pin, aren't we? Oh, well, now you can't see the pin because it's against the joint. Okay, there's the pin, and it is right on the center line, exactly on the center line. And then there's another pin farther back. I don't know if we can, probably can't focus on that, but on whole section 7, there's another pin. And then the two halves are butted up against those pins, taped at the bow. Let's zoom out so you can see that, taped at the bow. In fact, the bow tape I ran down the sides of the boat, and just after that, about 8 inches back, the plywood wanted to lift up a little bit from the hull, And so I put another piece of tape, and on the other side I'll put a longer piece of tape because that released. And then at the back sections of plywood seemed to center pretty easily. So they're just lined up in the center with the front plywood, whoops, where is it? Right there, and taped. And then at the back of the boat, let's get focused here. At the back of the boat, doesn't want to focus, does it? You gotta zoom out and it'll focus. There. At the back of the boat, we just brought those two pieces so they lined right up with our the center of our planking, where the planking overlaps in the herringbone configuration. Okay, and again, a lot of tape. Use longer pieces of tape. If your tape's not holding, put a longer piece of tape on. Okay, now we're ready to mark from the inside with a pencil, reaching in up underneath. That'll be a little bit tricky, and we want to make sure the pencil line is following the edge of the plank precisely. We don't want to get the wrong angle on the pencil as we come along marking the bottom piece. If we angle it the wrong way, we'll be pulling away from the plank and we won't get as close a fit. Okay, and at the bow we did bevel we did just like in the other video, we did bevel the two pieces so they come together nicely in the middle. Whoops, here we go. And you can see it's fairly, fairly tight joint there. That's plenty tight enough. If you leave them square, that'll work, but it's nice to bevel them. So where they're coming together at an angle there at the bow, they're going to fit a little more closely. Those will pull together even tighter when we have the pieces finally fit. Okay, there we go. So moving right along. Getting a little bit late tonight, but I really am enjoying this and don't want to stop. Okay, so we'll get these pieces marked at least. Okay, talk to you later. Bye now. Now with the marking of the bottom plywood planking, when you're doing both sections together and you're doing it from underneath, if you're on the floor, that's probably not going to be so easy. But with it up on a table, it really works quite well and it's fairly simple. In the narrower forward sections, you can probably mark it from both sides, from one side of the boat, standing on one side. I did want to show you, you want to make sure you're pressing that planking right down against the plywood planking, right down against the cedar planking, right where the pencil is tracking. So move your top hand on top of the plywood, right along with the pencil underneath. So the pencil isn't going to slide through between the planking and the plywood and give you an inaccurate mark because of too much angle there. Also make sure your pencil is angled towards the planking, not excessively because you don't want to slide in between the planking and the plywood, but angled towards the planking enough that you're not levering the tip of the pencil away from the planking and making a false mark. Okay, so the first few sections you can probably do from one side reaching across, but as you get back farther, you're going to have to mark the port side from the port side, standing on the port side, and the starboard side, standing on the starboard side. There's no other way to reach across. You don't have enough arm run to reach across. So this goes quite quickly and easily. The big thing is making sure that the plywood is down tight against the planking as you draw your pencil line. Okay, good. Okay, there we are. The bottom pieces, the bottom plywood planks are all in place, fitted and in place. It was about 4 hours. They're not epoxied yet, I'll do that now, but they're all held in place with the super glue, the CA, about every 4 inches, all the way along the center line, all the way down along the edges. Remember when you're doing this step, you want to keep the plywood plank slightly, almost either flush or slightly indented, slightly below the cedar plank. Because if your plywood plank is standing proud of the cedar plank by a significant amount, when you start to sand it all smooth and level, you're going to sand through the outer veneer of the plywood and you'll have a cross grain look. not a major problem. It's not going to affect the strength, but just a little less cosmetic. So I was doing usually just 2 dots at a time of CA, and sometimes if it just was fitting without really holding it in place at all, I'd do 3 dots and then spritz them with the accelerator. And with 2 dots, I would put the CA on, spritz it, and then I'd use 2 hands to hold the plywood plank in position while it's set up. And I could feel that the plywood plank was either flush or very slightly indented from the cedar plank, which is what you want essentially everywhere, except along the center line where you want those 2 plywood planks to line up perfectly with each other. I like to use a rubber glove with the spritzing, because otherwise I'm spritzing my fingers all the time with the accelerator. I don't think it probably does any damage. It's never bothered me, but rubber glove can be nice. Try not to glue your rubber glove into the super glue. I did that a couple of times and had to pull it out quickly. Okay, occasionally I would reach up underneath and push the planking out or push the plywood out, so I'd get a perfect match there as far as elevation, so I wouldn't have the plywood or the cedar plank higher or lower. So occasionally reaching inside helps. Another couple tips, weights are really helpful. Tape can help wherever you want to use tape. Put tape on to hold things in place. I think I had a piece of tape over the top here at one point. Had some tape on the joint between the front plywood planks and the back plywood planks where they join. Weights can help. These zinc ingots are terrific, but any books are great. Books are less slippery than this. If you have a slippery weight, it can help to put a piece of coarse sandpaper underneath the weight and hold it on that way where you start to have more slant. So like, you can see that well enough. Let's step back and so you can see a little bit clearer some of the things I'll be talking about here. So there, without that sandpaper underneath, that weight would just be on the floor. Now you can see the frequency of the, here's my hand. Up in here where there's a little more twist to this plywood piece, the CA is a little bit more frequent. Here I got the plywood just a teensy bit proud of the cedar. I don't like that, but this plywood has a pretty thick face veneer, so I think I'll be fine there. Any other details? Here's the joint here between the front pieces and the back pieces. It's nice when that lines up just right. And you can see that's a pretty tight fit. To get your tight fits along the edge, it's just a matter of not being too eager and or too rushed, and just take your time and sand a little bit, fit it in place. Have all the 3 other pieces that you're not working on either weighted down or taped down, held in place firmly, so the piece you're working on is the only piece that is movable. You can see that's a real nice joint everywhere. Now, the big question that came up earlier was, not sure, is that in focus? Yeah, I guess that's focused well enough. The big question that came up earlier was whether to epoxy all the planks at once, plank everything, and then epoxy it all at once, or whether to just do the bottom section and then put in the plywood bottom planks and then epoxy the last part of the hull. Well, in the first video I do comment that fitting the plywood section may be easier if these planks aren't quite as locked in position, but actually I didn't have any trouble fitting these plywood pieces, and you can see they turned out absolutely perfect. The fit is essentially perfect everywhere, and that was easy. Just taking it a little bit at a time, and sanding and fitting, sanding and fitting, sanding and fitting, or using the plane. The plane's nice. Be careful with power equipment. It's real easy to go too far with power equipment, power sanders. So hand sanding and hand plane may be your best choice for this process of fitting those bottom planks. So the big difference in fitting those bottom planks early was up here at the front, and that made this part very simple. So here where the plywood plank has a little bit more twist, it's more horizontal back here, and then up here it's twisted to a 45-degree angle. Now on the first build, we worked fine. We used a couple of brass ties, wire ties through this front section. This is actually section 2 here. Section 1 here, section 2 here. We used a couple of brass wires, just twisted them, and that held that twist into the plywood plank. But this time around, having epoxied all the way up previous to doing the plywood, we could just use super glue down to the planking, and that held the twist in no problem at all. So overall, I would say this may be easier. Or you could do a combination of two methods. You could plank halfway, epoxy it, and then plank the rest of the way, epoxy it, and then add your bottom planking. But I think it was quite a bit easier having a real sturdy, rigid hull section up to the end of the planking to CA the plywood to. So moving along, working great, and gosh, look at that shape. It's just like a big fish. I love this boat because it is such a graceful shape. I'm going to pull back a little bit, see if you can see the whole thing. Whoops, there we go. We're going to get a little bit disrupted here. And it's hard to get a sense of how beautiful that is without being here in the shop with it. Anyway, it's going to be so fun to paddle. That hollow bow section is just gorgeous. If you can pull that in, it's not that hard, and it's just a beautiful detail. Going to roll the water. The hollow bow section is going to roll the water right back away from the bow. So it'll be a very dry boat to paddle, very swift, very fun, very fast. Okay, looks absolutely perfect at this point. Lots of fun and very fast. Fitting the planking essentially perfectly was only 4 hours. It doesn't have to be perfect. The epoxy will fill any gaps, so not to worry. But it's fun to do something, you know, with a little skill and see how good you can get it. So if it's a learning process, don't worry about, you know, little gaps, but because it won't affect the boat at all. Nobody will know except you. Nobody will ever see those gaps. But it's pleasing to get it as good as you can do it. Okay, so again, have to keep moving ahead instead of just spending all this time admiring what how beautiful it looks at this stage. Okay, talk to you later. Hi. Okay, so we're getting ready to do the epoxy on the joints between the plywood planking and the cedar planking, and also along the center line of the plywood planking where the planks come together. But first, a real quick wipe down with acetone, because we'll be going down onto some of the epoxy where we've already used epoxy and it's set up, and we might, if we got an amine blush on there, the new epoxy won't adhere very well to the amine blush. So we'll just wipe it down with acetone. Warm water also takes the amine blush out, but we don't want to get the plywood wet because we're going to do the epoxy work right away. So this is the acetone. We'll just wipe it down, and tempting to use a paper towel, but you're going to have little bits of paper towels, you know, coming off on your boat all over the place because it's a slightly rough surface still. So use the acetone and just a quick wipe down. I'm just wiping down the first about 5 or 6 planks, maybe 8 or 9 planks. And getting the amine blush down, so just like that all the way along. Later on, we'll wipe the rest of the boat with water. We don't need to use acetone on that because we're well away. Well, we could use acetone, either water or acetone, either way. The only thing with water is you just have to have enough time for it to dry. And if it's bare wood and you get it wet, it's going to raise the grain. But I think we can wipe the outside down with water and not have water get on the planking, the bare planking on the inside. So we'll probably wipe the rest down with water and a rag. Okay, and then for the epoxy, Again, you want the epoxy to be fairly warm if you're working in a, so it penetrates because the viscosity is greatly affected by temperature. If you are working in a cold shop, use a light bulb, not an LED bulb or a fluorescent bulb, a regular incandescent bulb. And if you're using these orange juice containers, they work great because they have a metal bottom. Set it on the light bulb while you stir it, and it'll heat up real quickly. But if it's a summer job, you're all set. So I'm mixing about, I'm going to mix up 8 large marks and 8 small marks. And since I'm just doing a thin joint, I'm just going to use a 1/2 inch epoxy brush. And I've trimmed this with the bristles about half the length of the standard bristles the way they come. So it just works better with epoxy. The longer brush bristles are too floppy for brushing epoxy easily. Okay, so this should go quickly. You don't need to see it. I'll just be going right along the edge, trying to get it soak in as much as possible. Okay, and I may hit any place on the planking where the first few layers are wiped down. Any place I see a bit of a gap where the epoxy sank in, I'll hit that too. No reason not to do that now that we wiped it down. Okay, talk to you soon. Bye. So I was fine with mixing up 8 marks, and they did all the way down one side and back along the other side. I was putting it on pretty quickly, and actually I'm working in a perfect temperature tonight, and not that I always do, but it just happens. It's probably 70 degrees, 68, 69, 70 degrees. So the epoxy is fairly liquid, really quite liquid, and soaks in well, and yet it's not going to set up too quickly at this temperature. So I think probably it's smarter to do 4 large marks and 4 small marks and work down one side, and do that fairly quickly so your epoxy isn't starting to set up, and then do another 4 large marks and 4 small marks and work back the other side, and then a third batch, 4 large marks, 4 small marks, work down the center. If you have any extra, go back, and you can go over any place where you've already done, and then you'll be done. Okay, so instead of 8 large marks, go with the 4 large marks, because with 8 large marks it's going to start to set up a little bit unless you're working really quickly, or even if you're working quickly, if the temperature is a little bit warmer, it's going to start to set up on you, and then it won't be as liquid. And if you're heating it, by the time you've used up 8 large marks, it won't be warm anymore, so it'll be thick again. So 4 large marks is going to be better for this, because it'll sink in better into that fairly tight joint there. But remember, this is just round 1. We'll be coating the whole boat from the inside, and then using the carbon fiber ribbons on the inside, unidirectional ribbons on the inside, and then we'll be coming back to the outside, sanding it down, and coating the entire thing with epoxy and fiberglass cloth. So this is just round 1 as far as getting everything glued together and solid and strong. Okay, good. Just flipped the boat over. That went really easily. To take it off by yourself, you have to lift one end about 1/4 inch, lift the other end 1/4 inch, and just kind of keep levering it up. And then the slots will release, and you can roll it over. And I did just want to show you the pins that we used. Up here at the front, we used pins on a large number of the planks. Starting at the shear, we used it on the top plank, skipped 2 planks, then used it on the 4th plank, and then skipped 2, used it on the 7th, skipped 1. So you can see, and then several of those planks, it's every plank, then skipped about every other plank going down. And then on this hull section number 2, those pins are a little hard to see, but anyway, there are quite a few pins on the first hull section 1. There, you can see them better there. Then on hull section 2, we also used quite a few pins as we got down underneath the turn of the bilge, up on the towards the top edge of the boat. We didn't have to use so many, but as we got around down in here, to keep that hollow in, we had to use pins on every other plank or so, and that's fine. Then on the next section back, section 3, there's just 1 pin there. That one plank needed to be held in a little bit. So that gives you an idea. And then section 4, I think we've got one pin back in there. There's that pin back in section 4. And then at the back of the boat we had about 7 or 8 pins, 4 or 5 on each side. And so there might be 1 or 2 pins scattered around in the middle sections. So not too many pins really overall, just in this front section where you're trying to keep that hollow in the boat for throwing the waves off. Okay, and then just wanted to show you the process of taking these hull sections out. Oh, yes, while you were gone, we did coat the inside and put in all our carbon fiber ribbons. That's really well documented in the initial video though, and there was no change there. Went really smoothly and easily, and so we got all that done. The back section we didn't do yet here, or the front section up in front of hull section 1. I don't know if you can see in there, but there's no epoxy or ribbon. We'll get that coated later after we take out the hull sections. Okay, so here's the hull section. Oh, now we've been pulling out the pins at the back here. So this hull section has no pins in it. And I just want to, let's zoom out a little bit so you don't get too dizzy. And I just wanted to show you, we just knock this whole section forwards and then just kind of work it back and forth until it releases. Okay, and that's all there is to getting the hull sections out. The front and back hull sections take a little bit more working because they have the tail piece in the back and the bow piece in the front, but they'll release the same way. Okay, so that's what we're ready for, is knocking these out. Oh, it does help to stabilize your boat, especially for the carbon fiber ribbons and such. So we used a couple of sanding blocks underneath there, and then just braced the bow on a single block. Also, before coating the inside, I did want to make sure I didn't want to have the boat ends unsupported totally. I didn't want the boat to it's still, you know, partially stable, not totally stable form. I didn't want the ends to drop down at all. So these blocks are fairly far back, right about hull section 10, the sanding blocks, and then I put a block under the very bow and supported the bow. Okay, that's all we need to point out now. Yeah, thank you. Bye. Okay, in this tail section, all the other hull sections came out really beautifully, very easily, the whole length of the boat. In this tail section though, it was a little stiffer, so I was able to free up the hull section, and then to get the tail piece free, I resorted to using a plastic putty knife and just kind of working it in underneath there until the tape broke loose, and this piece was then free, well, almost free to come out. Okay, you can see it's really holding in there pretty well. But the plastic putty knife was real easy. That didn't damage the boat at all. You don't want to be too aggressive pulling this out because remember, the planking has an outside coating but hasn't been coated on the inside yet, so it's only half of its strength there. Okay, so I just wanted to show you that tip, and we'll clean up this area, pull the rest of the tape out, and we'll have all our hull sections out of the way. So that's good. This stuff will just peel right out, because the epoxy can't stick to the glossy tape, or it can't really stick to the double-sided tape either. The double-sided tape sticks to the epoxy, but the epoxy doesn't really grip the double-sided tape. So there we go, all clean. Perfect. Get that out of there, and we've got it. Now we're ready to coat the inside where it hasn't been coated. But first we'll wipe down the inside, because when we're coating these uncoated areas, we'll get epoxy over the edges onto the coated part, and we want good adherence there. But we won't use water because we don't want to get all these uncoated parts saturated. So we'll wipe down the inside with acetone, and then that will deal with any of the amine blush that might be on the surface. Okay. That's all covered in the initial video though, so nothing new there. So now we've removed all the tape from the outside, all the pins out, all the tape off the outside, The outside places where there was tape still haven't been coated, but we have coated inside where all the hull sections were. So you can see it's pretty constant epoxy except for the middle plywood sections. We have not coated those at all yet. At the bow and stern, we've done really nice fillets with the thickened epoxy with silica in it, and right over clear epoxy. You want to make sure the clear epoxy is on first, so you saturate the wood with the clear epoxy, and then the fillets. Now those fillets, you don't want to mix it too thick because it's hard to get it into such a tight V there, but if you mix it too thin, they're all going to sag down into the boat and you won't have much left at the top. I had some sag, and twice I think brushed the epoxy back up, the thickened epoxy back up to the top of the point at the stern. That's the stern there, and the same at the bow. Down at this end I had some sag where the epoxy wanted to run down into the bottom part of the V, and so I just took the brush and pushed it back up a couple of times, and now it's pretty even, a little bit lighter at the top, but I think that's good. If you're going to hit a rock or something, it's going to be right down there in the bottom of the V, so that's a little bit heavier, and that's good. But don't overdo it. Epoxy's heavy. You don't want to add any additional weight that's unnecessary. So remember how strong epoxy is, strong and flexible. So this is plenty of epoxy there. That much is very, very ample. So don't think you're filling up the whole bow with epoxy. The boat will be a battleship. So keep it light. As far as the carbon fiber ribbons, they all look really good. That one's really just perfect. You see it has a nice bed of epoxy all the way up. Most of them are just like that. A nice bed of epoxy all the way up. So there are no gaps underneath the ribbon, but there's not a lot of run out at the bottom. There were two where I had a little bit more run out than I really would feel was ideal. That's just extra weight, totally wasted. And this one here, there's a little bit of extra run out. That's where the pre-thickened, I didn't mix it quite thick enough on those two apparently, or I didn't catch it and brush it back up. And so we added a few ounces of extra weight there, unnecessary, because it doesn't really add any extra strength. All the rest of them look really, really nice. We have a very satisfactory bed of pre-thickened epoxy underneath the ribbons, but no extra weight added. So that's the goal. Perhaps maybe your goal can be to do better than I did, to have none where you have any run out that's excess. Okay, here we go. And looking forward to moving on to the next step here pretty soon. We'll be putting on the carbon fiber tube along the shear, and then we'll be coating the outside with clear epoxy where we had tape on the joints, butt joints. And we'll be checking all the butt joints. If we have a butt joint that is a little bit wider, then we'll just add some pre-thickened epoxy to it and take care of it that way. So everything's looking great. In fact, here's a butt joint that looks a little bit wider. I might add a little pre-thickened epoxy to that right now, and then we'll have that all taken care of. Okay, super, going great. Remember, this is just the addendum. All the full detailed tips and instructions on doing each step are in the first video. And now we've flipped the boat over and we've touched up all of the bare places on the outside, all the butt joints, and we've gone over it twice. We went over it all once. We used a thin, one of the smaller half-inch brushes, the acid brushes with the metal handles, to do this work because it wasn't large areas. And any place we saw seams that looked like there was a little more open seam, we went over those and filled those in. So sort of a careful, any place that you think on the outside needs a little bit more epoxy, sort of a careful touch up there. Oh, we also did the pinholes. So butt joints we went over twice because remember the end grain of the butt joint soaks up a lot of resin. And so you want to hit those twice because the resin you put on at first may all soak into the end grain of the wood and leave the joint dry. So we went over those twice, went over the pinholes twice, especially at the bow where there were more pins in, and any place else that we had open seams. So very simple, just used 4 large marks on the first side and 4 large marks on the second side, 4 large marks of resin. And now we're getting ready to flip the boat over. We'll put the fiberglass tape on the inside down the center line where the 2 plywood planks join together on the bottom, and then we'll put the Kevlar in where you stand, where you step into the boat and where you sit. That's a terrific amount of reinforcing, very abrasion resistant. The Kevlar it'll last longer than any of us. And yet it's just the strength we need right where we put the load, right where we're sitting, right where we're stepping in. So we're not going to build the whole boat heavy. If we put that thick a pad of Kevlar on the whole inside, we'd have a tank. So we're just putting that heavy Kevlar pad right where it needs the support. And the rest of the boat we're keeping really light. Now you can see we've got our fiberglass ribbon laid down the middle, and we're ready to position that. But before we get into that, we're going to wipe down the inside of the boat with acetone and get it ready. Now we don't have to wipe down the whole inside of the boat. We just want to wipe down the part, sorry about that. We just want to wipe down the part where the Kevlar is going to go. Now this is the larger boat, and so the measurements are slightly different, but we're still working, starting the Kevlar right around section 8, all section 8 here. And if you have the two ways the Kevlar comes from different suppliers, sometimes it's 32 inches, sometimes it's 36 inches. If you have the 36-inch Kevlar, start the Kevlar just maybe 3/4 of an inch behind section 8. If you have the 32-inch Kevlar, wide Kevlar, start it about 3/4 of an inch in front of section 8. And that you can tell where the sections are again. In fact, if you have the 2 pads glued in now, then you have 1 carbon fiber here, and then section 8 is right in front of that carbon fiber. So that makes it fairly easy to find. Okay, and then the acetone, I want to give a fairly thorough wipe. And again, we're using acetone instead of water because we want to keep the wood dry, and acetone will dry almost instantly. So we're going to wipe the sides, right where the Kevlar is going to go up the sides, and then we'll do a quick sanding as well. So we want to get the aniline blush off before we start sanding and before we start trying to adhere to this epoxy. So don't be too skimpy with the acetone. You need to really dissolve that aniline blush. And then we've marked the front edge of the Kevlar. Either if you have the 32-inch, measure forwards 32 inches. If you have the 36-inch, measure forward 36 inches. Either one, it doesn't really matter which one you have. But remember, the width from side to side is 32 inches. So you'll want to make sure you measure both dimensions. In fact, let me just check that, and yes, the width from side to side is 32 inches. So typically we'll cut it with the roll. It'll hold a bit of the shape that it was rolled in. We'll cut it so the roll is 32 inches wide. So it just kind of wants to lay right in there. Okay, so check both dimensions. If they're both 32 inches, then it doesn't matter. It really just where we lay it in. Okay, so that side's pretty well wiped down. Remember, using a paper towel on this wipe down is not that great because it leaves little bits of paper towel anywhere there's a rough place. So use a rag, it just saves a lot of time. So using any kind of piece of old clothing torn up as a rag works great. And use plenty of acetone to get it nice and clean. I don't think I got much aniline blush. It set up pretty quickly and it was dry. The air was dry. So I don't think there was much aniline blush, but always want to wipe it down to check. Okay, now this is the part of the video that was described in the previous set of videos, but you didn't actually get to see it done. So I'm going to work fairly quickly here. When we get to the big batches for the Kevlar, we want to work extremely quickly. But the temperature is just about 70 degrees here, and so things won't be setting off too fast. But the key to working with larger amounts of epoxy is to get the epoxy out of the pot, out of the mixing pot, super fast. While it's in the mixing pot, it's doing a chain reaction, creating heat and setting itself off faster and faster. Once it's out of the pot and spread out just a little bit, it is much slower and you have a lot more working time. So mix thoroughly, but mix fast, and dump it out of the pot when you get to the bigger measurements for the Kevlar. We'll be mixing, I think the original video says 16 at a time, 16 large marks at a time for the Kevlar. For the fiberglass strip, we don't have to mix that much though. Okay, so we'll probably just do, we'll probably do 8 for the fiberglass strip, and that should get us most of the way down the boat. Maybe all, that may be all we need. We'll see. Okay, so I'm going to get working here. Some of this section will probably speed up. The description, even though it's not filmed as it's being done in the original video, the description is extremely thorough. So I don't think it would just be wordy to, needlessly wordy to describe it all again. The description in the first series, it's in video 3 out of 7 on YouTube. That description is very comprehensive. So I'll be working and you can see how this goes, but we'll speed up a lot of it so you don't have to, it takes longer to watch the video than to build the boat. Okay, in this part, I just coated the outside and it's a little sticky still. If you have time to let the outside dry, that's great, but I like to keep going, so I just put my thumb in the sticky part on the outside. Okay, so the sanding is important, especially to sand down any bumps or any high points, which will keep the Kevlar from lying flat. So that's the biggest part of the sanding, but also roughing up the surface that you're sticking to is good as well. We're using the 100 grit professional 3M sandpaper, which I love, this purple stuff, but any 100 grit production paper is fine. Be perfectly suitable. Okay. No need for a glove on this part. You want to save your blue glove just for acetone work, because that's the only thing you need the blue glove for. Okay. Bit of a ridge here on the edge of this carbon fiber ribbon, so I take that down so the Kevlar will lay on smoothly and flat. And you can't use a sanding block on this step because you've got to conform to the curve. That was the first 8. Now we're mixing a second 8 here. You see we're working quickly. We want to keep the joint, we don't want the resin to set up underneath the fiberglass cloth, especially right at the joint or before it's all smoothed down tight, because then you're in trouble. So working quickly, another 8 here. Eight large marks of resin, 8 small marks of hardener. You don't want to mix up really large batches on this step, because working with the fiberglass cloth, getting it in place and everything takes a little bit more time than the Kevlar will take. The Kevlar is a big flat, big pad, and so we'll switch to 16 marks there. But on the fiberglass tape, I like to do 8. Because you have to do a little bit more precision work, which is a little bit more time consuming, and you don't want the pot to be setting off while you're working. But you saw I poured the pot out to start with, and now though I want to work with the pot, saturating this cloth where it didn't get saturated yet. So anywhere the cloth is white, you haven't got it yet. Now the process, the trick here is to glob the resin on pretty heavy, but then to wipe it thin. You don't want the resin, excess resin doesn't add weight, doesn't add strength, it adds a lot of weight. So glob it on quickly, but then brush it out thin, just so it just barely fills the cloth weave. You don't want a lot of excess resin on top of the cloth. But if you try to brush just a little dabs real thin to start with, you're going to take too long, and you'll have trouble with it setting up on you, and that's not good. So glob it on pretty heavily and then brush it out thin. That's the process. That was the second batch of 8, and now we're on to our third batch of 8, and that should finish actually, don't quite need 8 here. I think 6 will be plenty, so we'll do 6 now. And then we'll be on to the Kevlar. Did you see how I had half of it down, so that's 6 large marks. I had half the strip bedded down and smooth, and then I lay the rest in, but I was getting some puckering at on the second half, so I took the end of the strip, lifted it up, and pulled it tight, so I get rid of all those puckers, and it lay down really nicely after that. Okay, just another little tip, and 6 small marks of hardener. Sure helps to talk aloud about the hardener and resin mixture, so you don't forget to put the hardener in or something. You hear yourself saying it, and that helps you remember what you've done. maybe you don't need tips like that. Maybe you don't need tricks like that, but it helps me. So might try it. Okay, that last 6 was actually a little bit more than I needed for the fiberglass tape, and so I went ahead and used it on the flat bottom sections, the plywood planks on the inside, and got up to about section 10 on both sides. So that'll give you some indication if you ran out of resin just doing the fiberglass tape, you're loading it up too heavily. It does not need to be that heavy. The only purpose of the resin is to lock the fibers of the carbon fiber or the fiberglass in place, or the Kevlar, and to stick them to the wood. Resin buildup by itself does not add any strength significantly. The other thing we're using the resin for is to seal the wood, but thin coat of resin seals the wood. So if you're using 1.5 times the amount of resin that we're calling for, cut back. The whole point is ultra light. You're going to be carrying that resin with you wherever you take your kayak. So keep it light. Brush it out, brush it thin. The weave of the fiberglass cloth should still be showing. You don't want it to be glossy smooth. You want to see the weave. You should not have any place where the fiberglass cloth still has a white color to it. That would indicate that it hasn't been saturated, and it has essentially adds no strength if it's not saturated. So make sure you don't have the white color, but don't try to fill the whole weave of the fiberglass cloth in. That would be probably twice as much resin as you needed, or 1.5 times as much resin as you wanted. Okay, and don't use the excess resin under where the Kevlar pad is going to go, because we want that resin to be new and fresh and as liquid as possible to soak into the Kevlar, so we get a real good bond with the Kevlar. Okay, moving on. We're ready to do our big batches and lay in the Kevlar. We've already fit the Kevlar, and so we know exactly how it's going to lay in, and that's a good step to do before you put your fiberglass tape in, because if you fit it now, you get it all sticky, and you don't want any resin on the Kevlar until you're matting it down in the resin permanently. Now for that fiberglass ribbon, I like that small brush. Worked pretty well. I don't think you need a wide brush. The small brush was really just as fast, and maybe a little bit more control. Now, for the Kevlar pad, you definitely want a wide brush, one of the 1-inch brushes, because you need the speed. This is all about speed, getting this Kevlar pad down. It's warmed up a little bit in here. It's probably 74, 75 degrees now. So I'm going to have to be working fast. And don't do it in 80-degree weather. It's just going to be too hard. Okay, with the 1-inch brush, I like to cut off the tips. I'm cutting off just a little bit more than a 1/4 inch. Squeeze the brush with your fingers so you can cut it so it'll be flat. And cut off, that's about 3/8 of an inch that I'm cutting off. And try to make it square across, it's just easier to use. Okay, I would not cut half the bristles off. So that was just over 1/4 inch I cut off. And that makes it work a little bit better with epoxy. It's not quite as floppy, but you can still carry quite a lot of epoxy on your brush there. So that's going to work just right for us. The other thing I've done is I filled up my resin container, maybe a little too full actually, but I didn't want to have to fill that up while I was working fast. I have my Kevlar pad right next to the boat over on the other side, so I can get to the Kevlar pad real quickly to lay it in place. And so I think I'm all set. I've done my sanding. I got off any sharp barbs of epoxy or bumps that would keep the Kevlar pad from laying flat. And I especially worked on the carbon fiber ribbons, sanded them, abraded those surfaces pretty thoroughly, because I want a good bond between the Kevlar and the carbon fiber surfaces. Looks good. I think we're ready to go. I've got my marks, pencil marks in the bottom, so I know right where I'm going to put another mark there and here. So I know where my Kevlar pad comes to. Good, and that's where I'll spread the epoxy. Okay, here we go. Full speed ahead. Speed. If you're the kind of meticulous, careful type, this is a time to leave that behind. To get wild and crazy. Get that epoxy out of your pot, stir it up, out of your pot, onto the boat as fast as possible. Mixing 16. I'm going to mix with the small brush that I was just using. I like mixing with the small brush slightly better. Either way is fine, but things faster mixing with the smaller brush. That's 8. That's 12. That's our big 16. Now 16 hardener. Lid's back on even when you're rushing. It's worth it. 16 hardener now. Don't mess up. Don't get the wrong syringe. But I can, even though the hardener syringe only goes up to 10, I can see where 16 would be. So, or you can do 10 and then 6. Okay, and this is a full pot. Okay, and then you're just pouring in a snake-like pattern in and out of the pot. Get it all out of the pot. Now don't brush this out too thin, because that Kevlar is a thick pad. We're going to need a lot of resin to saturate it. So keep this resin underneath the pad fairly thick. As thick as it will hold on the sides without just all running off, and quite thick on the bottom as well. It's all going to be soaked up by that Kevlar pad. This is where I'd love to have a second person mixing the next batch right now. In a second mixing pot, or the same mixing pot, but second person right now mixing it up. Is it ready? No. I have to do it myself. I'm on my own. Okay, next batch, 16 again. You think, what's the rush? Well, we got to get that pad into that wet resin. We don't want the resin to start to stiffen up. That was one. That's the second syringe. That's 8 marks. That's 12 marks. And here's 16. You think, well, why not mix more? Well, it's really not going to save you time. And This way you're working with fairly recent batches all the time. It's just as efficient in that mixing larger amounts takes longer to mix it thoroughly than small amounts, and it's been in the pot longer and everything. So I like these batches of 16 at a time. That's a pretty big batch actually. It's quite a lot of resin. Don't skimp on the stirring though. If you don't stir it thoroughly, it'll never set up. So don't skimp on the stirring. Stir thoroughly. Once it's stirred though, dump it out fast. Spread it around as you dump it so you don't have to spread it afterwards. You're going to need more down the center line too. You won't have enough for the Kevlar pad. Okay, number 3. Now on to number 4. Two. 12. And that's 16. It may seem goofy to you to count aloud, but boy, it sure helps. So 16 small ones of hardener. There we go. Speed is more important. I mean, don't go completely wrong on your mixture, but speed is more important than being absolutely precise now. Just get it done fast. Get it fast. That was the last part of my 16 marks from before. You saw how we wanted to smooth the Kevlar in, have it all smooth and in place before we used any resin on the surface. That way we could use our gloves without getting our gloves too sticky. A little bit sticky, but not too sticky. In fact, at this point I'm going to pull these off and put on new gloves. A little bit sticky. Working with sticky gloves or sticky equipment will slow you down. It's faster to change your gloves and get clean, keep everything clean. So we're doing pretty good at this point. Want to get another mixture of 16 as quick as we can. A little short on hardener. I have plenty of resin. I'll get more hardener right away. Okay. We are ready to roll here. Let's get this finished up. A few more batches and we'll have it. Again, don't slow down at this point. You got to keep moving fast here because you want this surface resin to get on there and saturate the cloth before any of the resin's set up. Okay, we're gonna get you in closer. Don't get in my way though. In fact, this should work. We're gonna get you on the other side. Here we go. Now, what I want you to be noticing is that as the Kevlar gets saturated, it's not quite as dramatic a change as fiberglass cloth, but it does change colors. So, watch for that. And you want to make sure it's saturated everywhere. If it's not saturated, it's not working for you. It's not doing anything. So it goes from a lighter yellow to a darker yellow when it's fully saturated. So you have to work the resin in. Give it plenty of resin, but you don't want to overdo it. You should still see the weave as a slightly bumpy, raised surface. But get out those lighter yellow places. You don't want any of the lighter yellow. You want it all to be saturated, darker yellow. It's not going to saturate just with the resin underneath. There wasn't really enough resin underneath to saturate it. So we got to add a lot of resin on the top and work it in through the cloth. But speed, again, we still have to get the other side. So speed is everything here. This is not careful work at all. You don't want to be careful. You don't need to be careful. Just be vigorous and energetic and get it done. The faster you work, the easier it goes because the liquid resin saturates much more easily than after the resin starts to get a little bit thicker from setting up. The thicker resin won't saturate nearly as quickly or easily. So you want to work as fast as you can and keep the resin as liquid as possible. You have to move a lot of resin up the sides so your sides aren't dry, going to stay dry. We're looking pretty good on that side, and you see the light yellow farther back there. Let's get that quickly. Get it right back in here. It's definitely not saturated yet. On your ends, along the edges of the fibers, try not to get fibers out of place. and try not to have fibers bumped up and sharp edges, because you'll have to sand those down later if you do that, if you don't get them smooth now. So try to get the edges, try to get your edges smooth along the edges of the fibers. Okay, this side looks pretty darn good. I think we're ready to move to the other side now. Here we go. And I had a lot of resin in the pot still because I wanted to have it convenient for the brush as I worked up the sides more. So now I've dumped it all because I don't want it to get superheated. And you're going to find that you're getting excess resin running down the sides here. So I'm taking that and putting it where I want it, where I can use it better. You don't need a big accumulation of resin down at the bottom of the sides, so it doesn't do anything. So take the excess resin that's running down and move it onto cloth that needs it. It doesn't really mean you got too much resin up higher. You really need that excess resin to saturate the fabric, but it's just going to run down, and then you can take it up and use it. Sometimes using the tip of the brush, if you're not sure you've got the fabric tight, is helpful. Okay, here we are, and looking great. We have one of the carbon fiber tubes along the shear deck edge, all epoxied in place. Now, a slight variation on this wider version of the ultralight kayak. The carbon fiber tubes are taking a little bit more bend because the boat is wider. And so we taped them in place initially. You can see the tapes here on this side. Maybe you can see those, all those tapes along the edge there. And you can see the tapes where I've peeled them back on the bottom side here. So we taped them in place, and that was a good starting point. But those tapes are about every 14 inches. That's the same as in the video that covers the entire build. I think it's in part 3 or maybe part 4. And so that was a great starting point, but with the more bend as the carbon fiber tubes go out around the wider version of the kayak, the tape was not holding them in place as firmly as we wanted. So then we just put dots of CA about every 8 inches, a little bit more frequently at the bow and stern, and then about every 10 inches along the middle of the boat. And remember that what we're trying to do is line up the outer edge of the carbon fiber tube so it's flush with the planking on the outside, because we're going to put fiberglass cloth over that. And if the carbon fiber tube is centered on the planking, it'll bump out enough on the outside that the fiberglass cloth won't want to conform to it. It'll be a little gap where it tries to bump up and get outside the carbon fiber tube, because the carbon fiber cloth comes right to the top edge of the carbon fiber tube, right over the carbon fiber tube, and then is trimmed right along the edge of the carbon fiber tube. So should be flush on the outside between the planking and the carbon fiber tube, and the CA works really easily. Just I could do 2 dots at a time. If you're being more cautious, you can do 1 dot at a time, and then hold it in place so it's flush, and then spritz it and move on to the next dot. Okay, and then we've done the tape on the outside. That keeps the epoxy resin that you're going to put in this groove between the carbon fiber tube and the planking keeps it, when it leaks through, keeps it in place and keeps it from, you know, forming drips and stuff. In fact, we want it to leak through and form a nice smooth fill on the back side. So really the only difference, the only difference really is that we used all those dots of CA super glue all the way along the edge instead of just using them at the bow and stern. But since we used those dots of super glue so frequently along the entire edge of the boat, when we got to ready to put the epoxy on, we were able to pull our tape back and peel it back. We peeled these back before putting the epoxy on. That made it quite a bit simpler putting the epoxy on. In fact, if you're doing the narrow version, I think I'd probably do it this way with the CA all the way along. Pull these tapes back, and then your epoxy is continuous, and you're not going to have to pull the tapes back later and fill in behind where the tapes had been located. So this system worked really nicely either way, but I would do it this way. It just saves a little effort. The other thing is, as you fill in along this edge, you do have epoxy that wants to run down the slope and sometimes gets over these tapes, which makes it harder to pull the tapes off later. So pulling them off, and you can see I didn't pull them off the tube entirely. I just rolled them back out of the way of the epoxy. Any system for holding the boat up is great. Notice here, I'll get you an angle so you can see how the boat is tipped more than if you line up the two edges of the deck, left and right edge of the deck, you'll see that the boat is tipped more than halfway. It's not vertical between the two edges of the deck. It's canted over a little bit more. And it actually balances the way it is now, so you don't really have to tie it up or anything. And I just put some braces on the sawhorses and the board for it to lean against behind. So that was quite simple and easy. Okay, now I'm ready to flip the boat and do the second side. 12 large marks of epoxy was the perfect amount for filling along the edge inside the carbon fiber tube. Okay, I think that's that, along with all the information in the first video, should be plenty as far as getting you moving on this step and making it go really smoothly. Okay, talk to you soon. Bye. Okay, now we're getting ready to do the fiberglass cloth, but there was one thing I wanted to show you before we started that. And this is a relatively significant detail. I did have one plank, actually looks like here as well, but one plank, there were several places along the length of the plank. That plank was a little bit low compared to the plank on either side. And I didn't want to sand the plank on either side down that much. So after sanding the whole thing down, it was still a little bit low. So we wanted to fill it with epoxy, and that was quite easy. But there are a few things about that. First of all, I put a piece of blue tape right along the edge of the plank immediately beside the low one. You could do that on both sides, actually. It'd probably be a little easier. I just put blue tape along the side, on the downside of the one that was low. And then I mixed up a small batch of epoxy, and using the brush, I just filled, just tipping the tip of the brush with epoxy on it, I filled up just above level. So that low plank had epoxy that was built up just above the level, just barely above the level of the plank on either side. If you try to get it exactly right, then you probably have some low spots and you'll have to refill it. So the best way to do it is just make it a little bit high, and then you're going to sand it down so it's perfectly smooth, so there's no bump and no dip at all. So that worked out quite well. It's a little bit darker at this stage, but when we get the fiberglass cloth on and the resin, the planks on either side will be pretty close to the same tone, so it won't look dark at all. Okay, oh, and the last thing to do that, if it's further down the side, you'd want to tip the boat up on edge enough that the plank you're working with is relatively horizontal. Not because otherwise, if you try to fill a plank down in here with the boat in this position, then the extra resin will just run out. The reason for using clear resin, it'd be much easier to use pre-thickened resin, of course, and thicken it. But then you're going to have a discoloration. You're not going to see the wood grain, and it's not going to be as pretty. So I think it's worth tipping the boat in such a way that the low plank is relatively horizontal, both directions. So it's not tipped up or back, and it's not tipped sideways. And then it's quite easy to fill it. You might have to position the boat differently for different low spots if you have several planks that you want to work on. Okay, but if you're going to paint the whole boat, but I think that's probably not what most people want to do with such a beautiful strip plank boat. If you wanted to paint it all, then you could use just a pre-thickened fill and sand it down. But the clear fill is quite easy to do. Okay. So now we have everything all smooth, and we're ready for our fiberglass cloth. You can see it's there and ready to put in place, and we'll get that going. This is round 2. This time, rather than using the 105 resin, 205 hardener on the cloth, we're going to use an epoxy called Silver Tip, and that's included in your kit. Silver Tip works in a similar way to a West system, but it is super clear, so it'll be a beautiful job. The ratio, though, the mixing ratio is different, so you want to be very alert to that. Mixing ratio on Silver Tip, here's the Silver Tip epoxy here. The mixing ratio is clearly specified. 2-part epoxy. Well, it's 2 to 1. So, where is it? Working time at 77 degrees. Fast hardener 20 minutes. Slow hardener 40 minutes, okay? It's a little cooler than 70 degrees in here now. It's probably about 65. And, well, most important piece of information isn't immediately obvious here. But this is a pint and this is a quart, so 2 to 1. 2-part epoxy. Oh, here it is. 2 parts A, 1 part B. So 2 to 1 ratio. Yeah, it's right here where you can see it easily. There you go. 2 parts resin, 1 part hardener. Okay, here we are, just getting ready to start our mixing. You can see now we're a little different from the first video. Everything in there is fine, but we're going to be mixing with a 1 quart pail this time, and the temperature is just about right for that. It's about just about 65 degrees in here and getting cooler, so we shouldn't have any bubbles. We're using the Silver Tip epoxy. That's 2 parts of resin, big bottle, part A, to 1 part of hardener, part B. So no longer erase that 5 to 1, no longer 5 to 1, which we used on the 105 West System resin and the 205 West System hardener. This Silver Tip is 2 resin to 1 hardener. And we're using a paint stick. We've got our squeegees here on the table and brush, and we're ready to go. We've also smoothed the glass cloth. This time we're not trimming it around the edges. That worked fine, but you know, this I think may be a little easier. Fiberglass cloth, the fibers slide against each other, so by pulling discreetly in this area here and here, we were able to get the cloth to conform almost perfectly the whole length of the boat to the compound shape. Just in demonstrating, I pulled a little bit of a wrinkle in here, but keep smoothing it until you have it, before you mix your resin, until you have it so it really conforms nicely to the shape. Okay, I think this is going to go very smoothly and very well. We always hope that's the case. And we're going to start in the middle of the boat and work both directions. We have to work forwards and backwards. And we can't have a dry edge ever. We can't have it set up along an edge, because that would ruin the whole project. If it sets up along an edge, along that edge, it's never gonna, you'll never have a neat joint. It won't lay flat where it started to set up. So we have to work fast and work both directions, towards the front, towards the back, simultaneously. We have started over here with with the part A, and we've done 4 ounces of part A, just a little over 4 ounces, and now we'll do 2 ounces of part B. Thorough mixing larger amounts here, so very thorough mixing. The resin is fairly cool. That'll give me a little bit more working time, but I want to get it out of the pot as quickly as possible. In the pot is where it heats itself up and will set off the fastest. So we'll get this out of the pot onto the boat as soon as we've got it mixed. We'll get it all out of the pot right away, just by dumping. Okay, let's see if we can get you up closer here. So you have a good view of what we're doing. That should be it. Okay. A little bit more mixing and we're good to go. This time through, we have the boat a bit higher. One of the important things in setting the boat up for this process is the boat has to be elevated. So we have blocks up underneath the boat, inside the boat, with some foam on top of the blocks to protect the inside of the boat. But the edge of the boat has to be up above the table surface. No place can the edge be resting on the table surface. Otherwise you won't be able to get this cloth at the edge of the boat to lay flat. So we've got the boat up about 4 inches everywhere above the table surface, and that looks just about right, just about perfect. Okay, I think we've got the mix here thorough, and we're ready to go. So we're going to pour this over the area that we think is about what we'll be covering with this, so we don't have to move it too far. And then we can just upend that there, and we're ready to spread. Now we're trying to spread it so we have just the right amount to go down the side. So it was a little more than we needed. The goal is to get it super thin everywhere. No excess resin, no excess weight, in other words. And no bubbles under the cloth. That's important. Oh, and no wrinkles in the cloth either. As you spread it down the sides, try to work all those wrinkles out. You'll get a few wrinkles that start to appear, but work them out by going over them again. Plastic on the tables, on the table surface is important because you're going to get drips down onto the table, inevitable. Can't avoid it. Okay, we're going to switch to the other side real quickly here. Actually, you can probably see this better. So, catch these drips, spread it along. Pot out of our way now. Okay, now we've got it all coated and it's looking great. The last detail, once you finish, you're really not quite finished yet. We've been going around just brushing out bubbles. Anywhere I see a little bubble, just a touch of the brush and that lets the bubble go away. So, and I've been doing that now for probably about half an hour after I finished coating it and getting it all smooth. I've also been looking really carefully for any sort of place where it might have a drip or a sag, because I don't want to have to sand that out. I'd rather just smooth it out with the squeegee at this point. In fact, I'm seeing a teensy bit of a strip there and here. So let's get those with the squeegee. We're essentially finished and it looks perfect. You can only see your drips and sags if you get the light right on the boat. And so you want to make sure you get down and get a reflection off the different surfaces. And so getting it really good at this point is so much easier than waiting and having to sand it all out. And it's very thin coating everywhere. There's a bit of variation you'll see in the boat where, okay, here's one little drip right there. Got it. Just smoothing it out just a little bit. You can't be too aggressive or else you'll skid your cloth. You definitely don't want to do that. These aren't hardly even drips, they're just slight accumulations there. Okay. No, that's looking good. So you don't want to skid your cloth at this stage. So just a very light touch. You can, earlier I was squeegeeing out the bubbles, but at the stage it's at now, where it's closer to being set up, and I can't touch it yet, it still would stick to my glove. So where it's closer to being set up, a very light brush stroke works best. Just actually a dry brush, and just right over where the bubbles are, anywhere you see a bubble. So it's just like barely touching the surface, and the brush, if you're doing it right at the right time, the brush won't stick or accumulate any epoxy. It's just a totally dry brush. There was a little bubble right there. Some places will bubble for another, I'll check it again in about 20 minutes. So the big thing is don't walk away from it, don't drive off to town and say, hey, I did it turned out great, because when you come back, there may be some bubbles. You can sand them out later, but it sure is easy just to hit them with the brush, and that's the best approach. They fill back in at this stage. The epoxy around where the bubble was will just fill right back in and make a solid surface. Oh, there's one. Okay, any other things, tips to pass on? I did use the quart buckets for mixing. Mixed 4 ounces of resin and 2 ounces of hardener in the 2-to-1 ratio. So 4 ounces of part A and 2 ounces of part B. And that seemed to be a nice amount for this temperature for working, but I work very quickly. But that ratio was pretty easy ratio to measure out, so you don't want to get into too complicated a ratio. And by pouring it on the surface, I got it out of the mixing pot quickly so it wouldn't create its own heat and set off too fast, and then spread it over the surface area I expected to have it cover, and then I'd move to the other end of the boat and pour the rest of the epoxy at that end, half at one end, half at the other end. So I keep a wet edge, working at both edges, and spread that kind of roughly over the area I think it's going to cover. And then I came back to the beginning, the first end that I started at, and got that really finely spread. So no excess, no sags, no dry places. And then when one end looked really good, or one section looked really good, then I moved to the other end of the boat and did the next section at that end, getting it really smooth and clean. It's much better not to leave epoxy in the pot because it sets off much faster in the pot, and although it may not set off hard, it's easiest to work with right after mixing. So if it's a warm day, you probably might not want to mix quite as much as I was mixing 4 ounces and 2 ounces. You might mix more like 2 ounces and 1 ounce, and then have to mix more batches, but your batches will be spread more quickly, and you'll be working with resin that's easy to work with and not starting to set up on you. But as I said, it's about 65 in here, and that's a really nice temperature for doing a job like this, because the resin's not too thick. If it's colder, the resin's kind of thick and harder to make it saturate the cloth, a little harder to work. And if it's warmer, you have less working time. So that was just right. You can do it colder, you can do it warmer, but this was great. Made it very easy. Okay, looking good. And when we come back a little bit later, I think in about maybe 3 hours, this epoxy will be just what we call green. It's mostly set up, you can touch it, it's not going to stick to your gloves, but it's still, it's sort of rubbery. It's not hard like fully set up epoxy. It's sort of rubbery, you can bend it and it doesn't crack or anything. And at that stage, we'll take a razor blade and trim along the carbon fiber tube, just like in the first video. Okay, so the differences here were from the first video, just to summarize, we used a quart mixing bucket. I think that, I like that. The other system using the smaller containers worked okay, but the quart was a little bit easier to stir it up real quickly. And we used a silver tip epoxy, which is what we're going to put in the kits for you. Silver tip dries especially clear, bright clear, and does a great job. So remember, the ratio is not the same as West system though. Okay, I think that summarizes it, and you should be in great shape. Thank you. Bye. Oh, there was one more point. Maybe you can see it. It's going to be a little bit harder to see through the camera, but it may show up. In places, you have a glossy surface after this process, and where the cloth is totally has a surface of epoxy on top of the cloth. And then other places, you're going to have a cloth finish. We'll take care of that with varnish, and you'll get a bright, shiny, perfect finish in the end. But if you try to fill the cloth everywhere, the weave of the cloth everywhere, you're going to have too much resin on there with this thin cloth. It's going to sag and run on you. So there are places where you get variation. I think maybe you can see that now. See the cloth weave there, and then beside it, well, let's see, where over here, there the cloth is actually full of resin, where there was just a little bit more on the surface. But not to worry, that's just the way it's going to be, and it will come out with varnish perfect. So looks great. The big thing is don't have any excess resin. Excess resin is just extra weight and doesn't make your boat any stronger. It's the cloth and resin together that make the boat strong. Excess resin on top of the cloth doesn't really add any strength. Okay, so you can see sort of varied reflections at this stage, matte finish in between shiny surfaces, but that is that's just the way you want it actually. That means you didn't get too much resin on. If you try to get a shiny surface everywhere, you're going to have too much resin, and it's going to run and sag, and it's going to be really a lot of work to sand out. So the key is to squeegee out all the excess resin, and and have as little resin as possible. If you use more of the silver tip than if you thought you were going to be short of silver tip in coating this resin, you squeegee it out a lot thinner. You've got it on a lot too thick. So we give you plenty of resin. In fact, you should have excess. So that can give you a little bit of an idea. And you can, it's best to squeegee it out right as you're putting it on, but you can go back and squeegee out patches that are too thick if you're quick before it sets up. Okay, at this stage it's probably best not to, it's really best not to do much more except hit the bubbles. If we try to squeegee it and if we push too hard and wrinkle our cloth up, it's going to be hard to get the cloth back down at this stage. Okay, there you go. That's all you need to know. A few easy steps here. Optional a little bit, but I decided that I wanted to do it. The inside cedar is quite smooth. Came out really nice, the coating. On the akume though, there's a little bit, you know, there was little filaments from the wood that caused a slightly bumpy surface. It wasn't bubbles, it was just little filaments from the wood surface when coated with epoxy. Make a slightly bumpy surface that I felt would be harder to clean. The mud got, you know, muddy feet and stuff might, the dirt might get trapped by the little bumps. So I wanted to sand it down. So I sanded it down with 150 grit of the purple 3M professional paper, and that works so nicely. So I sanded it real quick. It didn't take very long, 20 minutes, half an hour maybe. And now I'm ready to coat it. I think I'll probably just use the silver tip to coat the bottom, and it's just the bottom okume plywood. I'm not going to recoat the sides. The cedar's really nicely coated already. I'm not going to coat the Kevlar patch, just the bottom sections of the okume in front and the bottom sections in the back. Then we'll also be gluing in our loops at the bow and stern. Those go right up in here, and I've sanded with a 120 grit, or with a, no, coarser grit, 80 grit paper right up inside the bow. You can see the sanding dust is still up in there. Maybe you can see it. So I'll get that out. Also, before sanding, I wiped it down with acetone in the bow where I was going to put the loops, because I want to make sure that we get good adhesion there. No, none of the buildup of amine blush up there on the bow. I also wiped down the bottom sections. I did wipe down the bottom sections after I sanded with the acetone. So this was just an old piece of 80 grit, but it's quite sharp, and that is just sanded back about 3/4 of an inch, and then this strap, the 1/2 inch nylon strap, will be situated just like, about like that, glued in along each side of the boat. So that'll go easily. And then on the outside, we've been sanding that down. We don't want to be too aggressive on that. We just want to, because we don't want to sand through the 1.4 ounce fiberglass cloth. That's pretty thin cloth. I don't want to sand into the cloth any more than necessary. And definitely don't want to sand through it. But we did want to get out any areas where there was a little bit of resin buildup. We didn't really have any drips or sags as such, but a few places, if you run your finger over it now, it's very smooth. If you ran your fingers over it before, you'd feel a little irregularity in the surface. And now after sanding, it's quite smooth. And we sanded that down with the 150 grit 3M professional paper. And so on the outside we'll recoat that with silver tip. This evening I'm just going to recoat the inside of Kume in the bottom with silver tip epoxy, and then I'm going to use the West System epoxy 105 with the 205 resin hardener, 105 resin with 205 hardener to glue the straps in the bow, and the same in the stern. This is a very thin coating of silver tip on the inside. Just if you sanded it nicely, it just hardly take anything to cover it. As thin as you can get it on there. And so I mixed up the silver tip. Remember, it's 2 parts of resin to 1 part of hardener. I used the extra set of syringes for that, and keep straight, which is resin, which is hardener, and I probably made more than I needed to even. I made 1 full syringe of resin and 1/2 syringe of part B hardener of the silver tip, and it's going on really smoothly, and it's going to be real nice. But brush it out as thin as you can get it, and I'm using one of these brushes with the blue tip on it for this process. So just place it first and then just spread it as thin as you can get it. And that'll give you a nice, smooth, shiny inside finish, which will be easy to clean, easy to wipe dirt off of. So just very thin, don't add any extra weight, resin is heavy. It doesn't add any strength. This is just to give us a nice surface that's easy to clean. So no strength added here. Don't think, oh, I'll put more resin on, make this stronger. It won't add any strength at all. Just weight. Just add weight. Okay, you can see how I'm brushing it out as thin as I can get it. Okay, so I'll continue with that and get the back sections, and then we'll be ready to glue in the bow loop and the stern loop. Okay, now we're on to the back sections. 2 observations I want to point out. One is a little cool in the shop tonight, about 60 probably. I did heat the resin over a light bulb briefly. Don't want to heat it too much. I'm probably going to heat it again here in another minute. If you get too hot, it's going to set off too quickly for you. It'll get thick and hard. We're heating it to make it thinner. But if you heat it too much, it's going to start setting off and get thick and sort of sludgy, jelly-like, and hard to spread. Oh, here's another note. Get the reflection off the surface. I just see up in the front here a couple of places when I get the reflection right that I didn't get quite enough on there. Okay, but keep it light. It's an ultralight boat. Okay, now to keep it light, you want to just tap the brush several places to place the epoxy. If you dip your brush and just start brushing, you can see over here better. If you dip your brush and just start brushing, you're going to have a heavy accumulation at the beginning. So tap it very lightly and then harder and harder, and then start brushing it out. That places the epoxy in the right place, so you're not having to move it, you're just brushing it out. Inclusion there. Get that out. Yeah. Okay, so placing the epoxy. If it's really cool in your shop, you can heat it up just a little bit to make it a little thinner, so it'll brush out a little bit thinner. Okay, and there you go. So I'll finish this up and be back with you in a few minutes. Okay, so we're getting ready to do the stern loop in the back of the boat. We've got the front loop in place. I've mixed up 2 large marks of epoxy and 2 small marks of hardener in one pot with clear resin, and the same amount in a second pot, which I've added colloidal silica to. So I have clear resin with hardener, and then a pre-thickened, slightly thickened resin with hardener, not too thick. The clear resin will saturate the strap with, and then the pre-thickened resin. Now on the strap, we'll just want to saturate the part that's going to be sticking to the boat. So, we want a loop that's about 3 inches long. So 3 inches of the loop we won't saturate. Below my fingers we won't saturate. Above my fingers we will saturate with the clear resin. and then we'll put a bed of pre-thickened, just like we did for the carbon fiber ribbons, bed of pre-thickened against the hull, and we'll just lay the strap in to the pre-thickened bed. Make sure it's bedded down, quite thoroughly. So I can just saturate this right in the mixing container. I'm just going to put the strap right down in the container up to the level. I don't want to do the last 3 inches because I want the strap to be flexible where it's coming out of the boat. So I don't want to have it all hard with epoxy where it's coming out of the boat. Here, it's a little hard to see, and so you can see and I can work at the same time. Well, it's a little bit tricky. Okay, so just saturating it up to the 3-inch mark that I'm holding with my fingers. Okay, get it good and saturated. Make sure that resin goes right through the strap and both sides and everything. You don't want it to ever let go. Okay, and then we'll lay, that looks pretty good, then we'll lay the bed of pre-thickened resin in to the boat. Okay, we have just the right amount of this, and we've already sanded and wiped down with acetone where this is going to be sticking to the boat, so we should get really good bond here. If you're tying this, remember this is the strap you'll be tying onto the car and stuff. You want to make sure this is really secure. So get it in there, get the epoxy right where you want it, so it's going to be totally glued in there. Okay, that's the bed, and now our pre-saturated strap, which we'll just lay in there. Get a little bit more, up a little bit higher, right up to our 3-inch mark here, and then in between. Okay, and spread it out. So one side of the strap is laying against the port side, flat, and the other side is laying flat against the starboard side. Okay. And about 2.5, 3 inches sticking out the top is perfect. Okay, get them laying in there flat on that bed of pre-thickened, so no gaps underneath them is the idea. And then you can add some more resin on top, whatever you've got left. I've already done the front, so the 2 large marks and of resin and 2 small marks of hardener were enough for both ends of the boat. Although, remember, there were 2 pots going. One was pre-thickened and one was clear. So I actually, in total, had 4 large marks of epoxy, but I split it into 2 pots. And get a little bit of epoxy in between the 2 straps too, gluing the straps together down in the V. You have the straps almost touching each other at the where they come together in the V. Okay, looking good. Get a little epoxy in there. One more in there. Make sure the strap is all the way up in the corner towards the front where it exits, and yeah, it's good. That looks super strong. Okay, a big part of it though is to get that strap totally saturated with epoxy, so the epoxy is not just sticking to the outside, it's going all the way through the strap. That way the epoxy can never release from the strap because it's right through the fibers all the way through the weave of the strap. Okay, we got it. Good job. Okay, now we're doing the, we had the boat beautifully sanded, first with 150 grit, and then we went over it with 220 grit. So everything was very smooth and essentially no bumps anywhere. You run your finger over it and Couldn't feel anything any lumps or anything, very smooth. So now we're doing a second coat with silver tip epoxy, and having done all that beautiful sanding, we want to make sure we don't get any runs or sags in this coat, because we just have to sand it again. So so we're doing a very thin coat of silver tip, and then we're checking with the reflection for any runs or sags. Keep checking, and if we see anything that's any buildup at all that might sag, we're going back to it and brushing it out. So we should have a very nice, it's turning out beautiful, it looks really gorgeous. We should have a very nice finish off the silver tip. And then we will sand it another time and put at least one coat of varnish on, probably 2 coats of varnish on top of the silver tip, with sanding, light sanding in between the 2 coats of varnish. Varnishing is a really different technique than brushing on epoxy. The key with brushing on the epoxy is that you get it very thin and as smooth as possible. It'll never go on super smooth like varnish though. But the big thing is keep it thin. Now we're just about to mix up the epoxy. I just put one full syringe of the part A resin into my mixing container, and now I'll put a half a syringe of part B into the mixing container. I thought you'd like to see how we do this. It's quite simple. We just tip the container enough that we can get the epoxy with no bubbles, and then pull the syringe out. Easier to pull it out a little bit too far and then push it back in. And that looks like about half a syringe full, right there. That's full of partner there. Okay, and we'll use that in. As I say, we already did a full syringe with the other syringe. Don't mix your syringes. Resin syringe and hardener syringe. And then got a full syringe of resin, half a syringe of hardener, and then I've just been mixing it with the brush. Now this is a good brush. Don't use the China bristle brushes. Do not use these for this coat of silver tip. You have to pull quite hard to get a thin coat of epoxy. You'll be pulling bristles out all over the place with these cheap brushes. So use the good brush with the blue tip on it that's in the kit. A couple of them in the kit. Okay, and stir thoroughly. I'm going to stir this over a light bulb because I want a slightly thinner consistency. It's about 60 degrees in the shop. That's not too cold, but I'm going to warm it up just a little bit more and get the consistency a little bit thinner so I can brush it on easier. Whoops. There, whoops, that doesn't want to stay. That's not going to stay. And maybe we'll. So works quite well just setting the container. These juice containers have metal bottoms so they conduct the heat really easily into the epoxy. Set the container right on the light bulb and stir until you notice the consistency, the viscosity getting more closer to that of water. Not quite that much, or else it'll set off too quick. You don't want it to set off too quickly. So it's a mix, balance between being able to get it heated up just a little bit so it's a little bit more liquid, but not getting it heated up so much that it starts to set off, because then after a couple of minutes of working with it, it's going to be thicker than it would have been if you hadn't even heated it. Okay, now I want to show you, we're going to move over here, and I want to show you the technique for brushing it on. It's not really brushing even, it's not at all like brushing paint or varnish. It's almost more like smearing it on. Okay, I think you can see pretty easily there. Don't have too much in your brush. Initially, if you stir with the brush, you've got it awfully loaded. So the first thing is place it. and this brush is loaded, so it's going to cover quite a bit of area. Place it, because if you just start brushing, you're going to have a huge accumulation right where you touch down the brush initially and start brushing, and you'll be fighting it, trying to get it spread thin, and it probably won't get spread thin and thin enough, and you'll get some runs and sags there. So place it just by tapping the brush over the area you think it'll cover. Now this was a big area because the brush was really loaded because I was mixing with it. If you mix with a stick, that might be smarter, I don't know. But this works okay. Okay, so you can see how we're really smushing it out. We're really using that brush bent double, you know, at a 90-degree angle, right up, you know, at the top of the bristles. Okay, and just smearing it. Use the reflection, get down low so you can see the reflection. So you're looking for two things: dry spots and heavy accumulations that are going to run or sag. Okay, and that's about it. But it's not really brushing, it's more just kind of smushing along and trying to get it out thin. Because if you don't get it thin, it's going to sag, and then you'll have to sand those sags off. We don't want to have to do any more sanding than necessary. Sanding's okay, but unnecessary sanding is not a good use of our time. Okay, so I think that gives you a sense of how we do it. Just really smushing it along, and you'll find it is really very neat, because let me see if I can get you a view of the boat when it's finished. See along there how nice it looks, just really shining and gorgeous. Also, I'm done up here. You can see the matte finish and the gloss finish. Okay, as I say, the next coat is varnish. That'll go on much more easily, much more smoothly than the epoxy. But the epoxy is, we're using the epoxy because we want to fill the weave as much as possible with the epoxy before we start varnishing. It takes an awful lot of coats of varnish to fill a weave, because varnish goes on much thinner than the epoxy and will not build nearly as much. So this coat of epoxy, and then we'll start varnishing. Okay, good. Just finishing up this simple step. We're coating the back side, the underneath side of the front deck pieces. And the biggest thing here is just we don't need much epoxy. We're just trying to seal the wood a little bit. It's never going to really get wet underneath the bottom side of the front deck. But it's nice to have it sealed instead of bare wood. But we don't want to add any extra weight. That's the biggest problem that first-time boat builders have, is they don't understand how weight accumulates. You add a little weight here, a little weight there, a little weight there, and all of a sudden you've added 50% more weight than the boat should actually weigh. And so the challenge for first-time builders is to get their epoxy spread really thin. That's true on the outside of the hull. That's true on this, especially true here, because this epoxy isn't really very necessary. We're just sealing the wood a little bit. So the challenge is try to do both pieces with a total of mixing just 5 large marks of resin and 5 small marks of hardener, and see if you can get it, get both of them coated. I should have plenty with the 5, and I just wanted to show you the spreading. This is definitely time for the squeegee. The brush, you can't get it nearly thin enough with the brush, so definitely time to use the squeegee. And you just want to kind of work it and spread it along. Don't let it be thicker than it needs to be. A lot of it will soak into the wood, and you won't get a glossy finish. You don't need a glossy finish on this. If you're anxious to make it go a little quicker so you can move on to the next step, you can heat this up before you spread it over a lamp. Don't heat the wood after you've spread it, though, because you get bubbles. So you can't heat it after you spread it, but you can heat the resin in your mixing container as you mix it. So that's the challenge for you. See if you can coat both pieces with just a total for both pieces of 5 large marks of resin. That's not a total of 10. It's not 5 for each. It's just a total 5 for both. And you should have an adequate amount to get them coated thinly. But you have to squeegee it out quite aggressively in order to get that amount of epoxy to work. I've got a little bit of extra, so I'm just going to smooth it around. And we're good. Okay, so keep your boat light. This is an ultralight. When you're carrying it, if you want to carry it 5 miles, you're going to appreciate the fact that it's light, or if you want to put it on top of your car, you're going to appreciate that it's light. Okay, so keep it light. There we go. Done. Okay, another quick step here. We're gluing together the pieces that go across the boat, lay horizontally across the boat behind the backrest to support the backrest. And this is fairly quick again. But in this case, since we are gluing things together, we want a slightly thicker amount of epoxy. We want slightly more epoxy in this case because we don't want a dry joint. We don't want all the epoxy to sink into the wood and not leave anything for the joint. So we've started with 4 large marks of resin and 4 small marks of hardener. And again, I heated this up because I'm always impatient to move on to the next step. So I heated this up a fair amount on the lamp in the mixing pot while I stirred it, and over a 100-watt bulb. And so now I want to work with it quickly so it doesn't start going off on me. In this case, you know, a brush and a squeegee working together are good. You can use a brush along the edges or for getting a little bit more resin on without overloading it. And get reflection off of it so you can see where you're light or where you're overly heavy. Without the reflection of light off the surface, it's pretty hard to see what you're doing. So use the light, use the reflected light. Okay, I'm seeing some patches where it's too light, so I'm just getting those with the brush, having spread most of it with the squeegee. Okay, that one's good. I'm going to set that aside so I don't put my sleeve in it. Now, these pieces are not all the same. You may have noticed that. They're two that are slightly less wide than the third one. The 2 less wide ones go underneath the third one. So the widest one is the top one. So don't put the widest one in the middle. It's a little bit wider, so it'll sit on the carbon fiber tube nicely. And the 2 narrower ones will sit inside the carbon fiber tube. Okay, so they're meant to be different. Don't sand them all the same. Okay, and a little bit more here. Often when we're gluing things together, we'll use clear and pre-thickened, but these have so much surface area and everything that they'll glue together fine with just the clear. I'm not worried at all about the strength of this. The biggest thing here is to have a flat surface that you're going to set them on, so the total laminate comes out quite, perfectly flat is what you want. Okay, and again using the reflection. Okay, and that's thoroughly coated. We'll lay this piece on top. And this is the widest piece here. It's going on top there. Okay. And then we'll flip this in a clean part of the table and coat this surface. Now make sure the narrow pieces are centered so there's an even amount of excess for the wide piece on each side. Okay, and I like to mix. I didn't anticipate I'd have quite enough with 4 large marks for all these surfaces, but I like to mix smaller batches, especially when I'm heating them, because
if you have a bigger batch and it stays in the pot very long and you've heated it almost to the point of setting off, you're going to lose it in the pot. So looks like we need about 3 more large marks to complete these 2 surfaces. So we'll mix that up and glue it together, and then at the end we'll weight it. I'll show you that at the end. Actually, if you can see the pieces underneath all these weights, books would work fine. You might want to use saran wrap and then the books on top so you don't stick your books down to the piece. But anything to keep everything flat. The big point of laminating the 3 pieces together is to end up with a perfectly flat piece. And so that's why on this bigger kayak we use the 3 laminates, 3 pieces laminated together instead of just a single thickness of a thicker plywood. With 3 laminates, each one has 3 layers in it, so we got 9 layers of wood grain, and it all balances out and should stay perfectly flat after it sets up. Okay, so we're moving right along. Looks good, and soon we'll be fitting the deck and fitting the back rest and moving right along. The silver tip coating came out really nice. Very few sags. The only place I got a sag was at the bow, the last side when I finished, and I came back and checked it once, but I should have checked it a second time. But that'll sand right out, not a problem at all. Everywhere else where I kept checking it and going back and brushing out any sags or runs, looks really, really nice, and it'll all get sanded, but it won't take very much sanding. It'll go very smoothly. And then we'll put 1 or 2 coats of varnish on top of the silver tip and have a perfect finish. So everything's looking great, and we'll be fitting the deck very shortly here. Just a quick note, there are 2 ways to handle squeegees after you've used them. One is to let the epoxy, fairly thicker the better in fact, fairly thick accumulation of epoxy just sit on the squeegee and harden up, and when it's totally hard, you can flex the squeegee and that epoxy will pop right off. That works fine. Maybe even slightly easier if the epoxy is still fairly liquid on the squeegee is just to use a paper towel and wipe all the epoxy off. If you don't mix these 2 systems though, if you're going to wipe it off totally thoroughly, get all the epoxy off, because a thin layer of epoxy doesn't like to pop off the squeegee. The reason the epoxy will pop off is because it doesn't really stick to the squeegee as part of it, but the reason it'll pop off is because the epoxy is slightly more rigid than the flexible squeegee, and so when you bend the flexible squeegee, the rigid epoxy can no longer stick to it. However, if you have a super thin coating of epoxy, the epoxy is equally flexible as the squeegee, even when it's set up, and so bending it isn't quite as effective. So if you're going to use the paper towel, just do it thoroughly, and the squeegee you can use repeatedly time after time. Okay, just wanted to make sure you understood squeegee etiquette. Okay, let's look at a few details. First, the bow straps up here, the lifting loops. Now, see, this part is not coated with epoxy, all supple and flexible. And then starting right at the carbon fiber tube, it is thoroughly saturated with epoxy. So it's like a piece of epoxy. It's just totally solid with epoxy. And there's no space behind it. Each strap is glued against the corresponding side of the boat. Starboard strap along the starboard side, port end along the port side, and a loop that is comfortable to hold but not excessive. It's not going to be dragging in the water all the time. You can get 2-3 fingers through it comfortably to lift the boat. 3 fingers is nice. Okay, even though it's an ultralight boat, it's still nice to have 3 fingers. And the loop at the back is essentially the same, and so you can see how that fits in nicely as well, lays right into the corner of the boat there, and a little bit of epoxy on top of the strap
but the big thing is totally saturate that strap and make sure it's got filled with epoxy underneath the strap. Even if the boards are not perfectly aligned on the inside, make sure that there aren't any voids beneath the strap. Okay, and again, same length of loop here on this end, and real comfortable strap to hold. You can get 2 or 3 fingers through it easily to lift the boat easily. Okay, that's one thing. Now our back deck piece behind the seat brace piece came out really nicely. I want to show you this. It's essentially perfect. It's going to be hard to see on the camera because we really need the detail. I can go in a little bit closer. Everywhere along the edge, epoxy has squeezed out. Here's the most squeezed out we had. That's the most. I haven't cleaned anything off yet. This is all squeezed out, but very, just barely squeezed out. If it doesn't squeeze out someplace, you probably have a void there, which is what you're trying to avoid. Avoid the void. Although since we coated both sides of each piece thoroughly, a void isn't gonna cause rot or anything. I mean, it'll last forever. Just you don't have quite the strength. Anyway, you can see the squeezing out there. That's a good view. You can see the squeezing out everywhere. Here, a little bit excess squeeze out there, a little bit excess there. But most of it's going to require very little sanding, and it's just absolutely perfect. Okay, and other details. Now we've moved on. We've flipped the deck over and taped that together. Let me show you how we've done that. Wider tape is good here. Because you want to make sure it holds. If it releases, you're just going to have to retape it. On a flat surface, and there's a very small gap here, about a 32nd of an inch gap between the pieces, because when we fold the pieces together, not tight together, but enough to form a little bit of a peak on the deck, those pieces will come together tight. If you have them fitted tight together when you tape them, you may pop your tape off when you bring it up into a peak, like so. But you don't want any, when they're brought up, you want the pieces to be touching each other. Okay, so just a very small gap there. And tape it thoroughly, rub the tape on firmly. If you don't rub it on firmly enough, you're gonna redo it, that's okay. Okay, and the underside of these has been coated, as we saw earlier. And look at that beautiful boat. We've got a beautiful coat of silver tip epoxy on the outside, and it is just gleaming and glowing beautifully, and going to be gorgeous. We'll still sand that down one more time, because epoxy always going to have less perfect finish than a varnish finish because of minor sags and runs, but it came out very clean. There are very few places where the sanding will take more than a couple minutes, so we're really looking nice here. Okay, so this evening I'm going to be fitting the deck. We'll tune back in here shortly, okay, when we've got a little bit of progress done to show you. But very exciting. Don't spend all your time admiring it at this point. Keep moving forwards. Okay, bye now.